How we doing everyone? Odin here from Tactical Edge Hobbies at G-Bung, and today in our custom shop I'm going to quickly run through how to adjust your FCU settings on your Polistar HP8 system. Here on the tech bench with us today we have the most commonly used Polistar FCU. There is other Polistar FCUs available and there is aftermarket FCUs available. They're relatively rare and they're definitely out of the scope of a quick tech talk that we're going to go through today. So if you do have one of those FCUs, get in touch with us, we'll be able to help you tune that too. Quick walk around of the Polistar board. I've got a joystick, down, up, left, right, and it has a center press in to get into the menu, which we're going to get to very shortly. We have a little LCD screen so we can read and set our settings. We have our main MCU connector here, which goes to the trigger board inside your blaster and controls your solenoids from there. Also read your trigger and selectors, obviously. You have your auxiliary power connector here, which in Australia, in Gel Blasters, we use this to power magazines most typically. Fun fact, in airsoft, this was originally designed for buckings with ultraviolet igniters for tracer BBs. But in Australia it works quite well to power our magazines. We also have a little power harness with a 7.4 volt minimum 300 milliamp hour battery here in Australia. So we use this same battery to power our FCU, which powers the system, and we also use it to power mags. So you don't want to go too small on your battery over here when we're using the power mags as well, because you do run the risk of drawing too much power through the FCU and the mag, and you may get dropouts of your FCU where you'll get lost shots and all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening. So with that, we're going to jump straight into the menu. One quick press down on the stick will bring the menu up. First screen we're going to see shows you the software revision that's installed on this FCU. So this is firmware version 3.0, which at time of filming was the most current. If Polistar bring out a new revision, we'll do a video for that one too. The other thing that this screen will show you if you hold the stick down is it gives you a fairly odd reading. Now, that's a hexadecimal code. If you jump on Google and you search for hexadecimal converters and punch that code in, it will tell you exactly how many shots your FCU has had. Now, I actually haven't had a chance to look that one up yet, and this FCU has kicked around the shop a bit. So someone down in the comments, can you look that up and tell me how many shots this one's done for me, please? Moving on from there, and we're going to move to the left. Now, the next setting we've got is Fire Control FE. So this one's set in FE. Now, Fusion engine, FE, and F2, they're dual solenoid engines. If we go down one, we're now in F1, which is our F1 and jack single solenoids. Now, it is important to make sure that this is in F1 and F2. You can damage a number of things if it's set incorrectly for your engine. So if you have a single solenoid, you want to see a 1 here. If you have a dual solenoid like an F2 or a Fusion engine, you want to see an E here. I'm going to leave this one in Fusion mode because as we work through these settings, they're all very much the same between single solenoids and dual solenoid engines. It's only really the last three that will change, and I'll get my, well, everybody's favorite little homie Gilly to put a bit of a note up in the corner of the screen here when we've gone out of all engine mode and we're in F2 only mode. So don't worry, you won't miss it. So we'll leave this one in F2 so we've got access to all of our settings, because when you go into F1, it actually removes the additional settings that you can't use. So FE for now, and we'll move to the left. First setting we're going to see is our rate of fire. Now with Gel Blasters, 30 is a nice catch-all number for all old mags and new mags alike. Depending on your mag, you might be able to get a little bit faster than this, or you might be able to get a little bit less than this. 30 is a good general number. The other thing that this can be quite handy for is for our Milsim friends who want to try and replicate the same rate of fire as what the real steel version of what they're using is. So for example, when I did my metal M260, not M260, sorry, my M60, this one we set to 12 shots per second, which matched the cyclic rate of a real steel M60 and gave it a really cool effect. So moving to the left again. This is our semi-auto, so our semi-rate of fire delay. So what this does, if you have a very touchy trigger and just even breathing on it might send it off in 3 or 4 shots, adding a little bit of delay there will make the FCU wait for 1 millisecond between each recognition of the trigger pull. So if you can manage to hit that trigger 30 times in 1 millisecond, it's only going to see 1. Now, not a bad thing when you're doing something like Milsim. However, if you're playing something like Speed QB, a 1 millisecond delay will actually roughly halve the amounts of shots you can get off when you're spamming the trigger really quickly. So we usually leave that at off. Moving to the left again, now we're into our selector position 1. So our selectors are our fire select. So we have on a standard M4, for example, safe, semi, and full auto. Selector position 1 is the vertical. So typically our semi, and that's what this one's set up for. So selector position 1 is 1 shot per trigger pull. We can move that up and we can go into burst mode if we want, or we can bring that all the way down to 0, sorry, come back to 1, where this is now in full auto. So 0, 0 is full auto. So that would now mean in selector position 1, semi, you're now in full auto. So we'll set that to semi, move over to selector position 2, which would normally be your auto. Most people will leave that at auto. Someone like a Speed QB player might move that up to 1, so it's now semi and semi. They can't accidentally knock it into full auto in the middle of the match, something like that. And I have seen some players run both in full auto. If that's your dig, then by all means, run full auto and have fun. But remember, don't overshoot people. Moving on to the next one to the left, we have our AntiStiction timeout. Now, I will explain stiction in the next setting because this one leads into that, and funnily enough, the next one leads into the next one. But suffice to say for now, this is a timer. So what this timer does is when you let go of that trigger, this timer kicks in. Adding 1 adds 10 seconds. So this moves up in increments of 10 seconds. So we're at 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. So if we leave that at 10 for this demonstration, we move to the left. Now we have our AntiStiction pulse. Now, AntiStiction pulse, if you have an older engine or an over lubricated engine, what you might notice is when you pull the trigger for the first time after leaving your blaster sit for a while, that first shot might just pop and it won't fly. It won't fly as well, or it might not even come out of the barrel. What that is when the components in the engine sit still for 10, 20, 30 seconds, however long it may be, they can start to essentially create a friction that has to be overcome the first time you then pull the trigger. And that's what this is. So stiction is static friction, and this has helped overcome that first shot drop off is what it's called. So this setting goes up in milliseconds and it adds extra time to the next setting that we'll get to in a minute. But suffice to say for now, when you let go of the trigger for 10 seconds, so you've let go of the trigger, you've waited 10 seconds, this will now add 3 milliseconds to your DP. Now your DP is your most frequently adjusted setting. This is where you want to come when you're adjusting your FPS. So to adjust your DP in normal circumstance for normal play, you would set it nice and high, usually 50's high enough. You set your pressure on your regulator to where you would like it to be, somewhere between 90 to 100 pound is typical. You would then fire 10 shots through a chrono and you would have a look at the variation shot to shot in that 10 shot string, and then you would come down 5. You would then do another 10 shot string and you would come down 5. What you will start to see is eventually your variation will reduce till you get nice consistent shots. And remember, we are shooting gels. They are varied by manufacturing. We can't control every single gel, so you're going to get some variation unless you've got a really good method of control growing your gels. You're going to see some variation, so you're looking for as much consistency in that 10 shot string as you can get, and you keep coming down in increments of 5. Eventually you will see that FPS start to drop off drastically. That's when you've gone too far. So now you would go back up 5 to your last good setting, come down 1 and do your 10 shots. What this will do, this essentially volumes the amount of air to your barrel. So when you pull the trigger and the air is discharged, you need a set amount of air to push that gel from one end of the barrel to the other. If you have too much air when that gel leaves the barrel, the excess air will knock the gel off center and create accuracy issues. If you have too little, as the gel gets to the end of the barrel, it will almost have a slight suction behind it and you'll start slowing your gel down and you will have a drastic FPS drop off. So setting this right is quite important to getting that accuracy that we're looking for, and it's also imperative to getting the efficiency out of your air system, so that you're not using 68 cubic centimeters of air per, sorry, cubic inches. We're in Australia, but that's a metric. 68 cubic inches of air per game, for example. You know, if you've got this set right, you'll get a lot more life out of your bottle. Move to the left again now. This is where we officially enter dual engine solenoid mode. So if my favorite little homie Gilly can put a little note up there now, these settings only apply to dual engine systems. Sorry, dual solenoid engines. You won't find these settings when you're in F1 mode, for example. So we have DN, DR, and CB currently off. If we go over here and we go into fusion engine, sorry, F1, and come back, you'll notice that we have our selector position still, but when we get to DP, we no longer have any settings. So you won't have these settings on a single solenoid engine. I'm sorry, I keep getting that mixed up in my mouth today. Now, coming back to where we were, we've done our DP. We've found the best DP setting for our gels to get the best velocity, best consistency, velocity, and efficiency out of our system. We now move over in our F2s to our nozzle dwell. Now this is where they vary. So the second solenoid, having a second solenoid gives you the ability to control the nozzle moving back and forward independently of the air coming out of that. So on a jack, for example, when that nozzle comes forward, the air comes out. That's just hit by design. That's how it works. On an F2, that nozzle can travel on its own, controlled, without any air coming out until you tell it to. So what our DN is how long our nozzle is held back. Now, the importance of this number is too short of a number won't hold the nozzle back, and as your gel gets fed up into the T-piece, the nozzle will slam forward and cut that gel in half. Too high of a number and you run the risk of allowing more than one gel to come through, and you get double feeding, because remember, we don't have rubber buckings up in our T-pieces like our airsoft friends do, so it's very, very easy to overfeed a T-piece and end up with double shots. This is why I would typically recommend a dual solenoid for a speed QB type player, because it's much, much easier to tune the double feeds out of a dual solenoid system than it is out of a single solenoid system. Not to say it can't be done in a single solenoid system, but it's not an easy feat sometimes. So this is the amount of milliseconds that the nozzle is held back. So 14 milliseconds tends to work pretty well. The thing to note with this setting as well is you are also having to allow for the time of the solenoids and so forth to be switching. So you're never going to want this below 8. Generally speaking, you won't want it below 10. 14 seems to be pretty good for most systems. It's something that I would highly recommend you go and grab your mags, go and play a game, and just keep an eye on your shots. If you start getting double feeding, bring this down. If you start getting chopped gels, bring it up. That is, of course, assuming that everything else in your build is done correctly. Moving to the left again now. We're now in our DR, or return to battery delay. Now, what this is as I was saying before, in a dual solenoid system, your nozzle will be pulled back and then released forward. Now, when the FCU releases that nozzle, it will start counting down in milliseconds until it releases the air to come out. So if you have this set at, say, 0, as soon as that nozzle is released, the air is going to come out, and all you're going to do is blow air down your feed tube and shatter whatever gels you've got there. So you want to give that a good sort of around the 17 to 22 milliseconds is what Polestar recommend. I generally find around 20 works, sometimes less, sometimes more, but look, it's a setting that you want it as low as you can get, because this will impact your ability to be able to do 30 rounds per second. Too high obviously means it can't do every single step 30 times in a second. So you want to get it as low as you can, but you also don't want to have it too low where you're now wasting air inside your T-piece, shattering your gel, and just generally having bad efficiency. So get that one set, and then we go to the final setting, and this one's again only a setting in dual solenoid engines, and what it is closed bolt, and you have off and you have on. Now, closed bolt, in an F2 the nozzle sits forward. You have two modes of cycling. Closed bolt off means that when you pull the trigger, the nozzle will come back, a gel will feed up, the nozzle will come forward, the air will come out. In closed bolt on, the nozzle will come back, a gel will move up, the nozzle will come forward, and it will then sit there and wait for you to pull the trigger. You pull the trigger, the air will go out, sending the gel with it, the nozzle will come back, another gel will come up, the nozzle will come forward, and it will sit and wait. So what it's giving you effectively, if you take closed bolt away, it's giving you pre-chambered gel or chamber gel when you pull the trigger. So typically speaking, depending on the setup, closed bolt on can be a good thing. It will give the gel time to stabilize. However, you want to be careful that you're not punting that gel halfway down the barrel. So tight bore barrels usually aren't an issue. The gel will come through the T-piece and it'll sit there quite nicely and happy and waiting. However, if you find you're getting some very weird readings, turn closed bolt off and it will then act much like an AEG does, where the nozzle will come forward and then the air will shoot out straight away as that's coming forward. Same as the F1 and the jack systems. So closed bolt's a luxury that only F2s can get. It does actually help accuracy if the rest of your blaster is built right, but if it's something that someone's put together as a trial, it's their first build, something like that, you may want to turn closed bolt off. With that said, we're now back at the original firmware setting, and that's everything that there is in a Polestar FCU. Fortunately, I was able to film the last little part of that before my camera died on me and I wasn't able to do the outro. So I hope that's given you enough information to tune your blaster to your playing style so you can get out there and have some fun. Remember, it's just as important that other people have fun as well, so don't go too crazy on your settings. Everyone's got to enjoy their time. With that said, if there's something I didn't address in this video, please give us a call, get on Facebook and send us a message, or come in and see us. I'm Odin for Tactical Edge Hobbies here at G-Bung, and this has been our Tech Talk brought to you by the Tactical Edge Hobbies Custom Shop. See you next week.